August 26th, 1346. 500 years of armored dominance ended in a single afternoon. Not by kings, not by noble blood, but by peasants with bent sticks and twisted strings. On a muddy slope near Crecy in northern France, 9,000 exhausted English soldiers stood silently on a hill. Below them waited more than 30,000 of Europe's finest knights. Armored, mounted, confident. French nobles argued openly about who would claim the honor of killing the English king. To them, this was not a battle. It was a tournament, a stage for glory. They believed steel made them immortal. They believed courage was enough. They believed history belonged to them. They were wrong. Crecy was not just a battle. It was the moment when medieval warfare collapsed into the mud. When armor failed and an entire social order began to die. If you're here to understand how wars truly reshape history, subscribe and stay with me. Because what happened on this field did not just decide a battle. It changed the world. To understand why Crecy mattered, we must step into a continent already cracking under its own weight. In the middle of the 14th century, Europe was not at peace. It was a web of dynasties, oaths, and inherited claims, all enforced by steel. At the center of this web stood Edward III of England. Through his mother, Isabella of France, Edward claimed the French crown. To the English, it was a legitimate inheritance. To the French nobility, it was unthinkable. In 1337, Philip VI rejected Edward's claim. What followed was not a single war, but a long, grinding struggle for legitimacy that history would call the 100 Years' War. Edward did not initially seek a decisive battle. He sought humiliation. Landing in Normandy in the summer of 1346, his army moved fast and light. They burned villages, they destroyed crops, they looted towns. This campaign, known as a chevauchée, was calculated vandalism, designed to prove one thing. The French king could not protect his own land. Contemporary chroniclers, including Jean Froissart, describe panic spreading across northern France. Smoke on the horizon became a political weapon. Philip VI could not ignore it. He summoned his vassals, and they came from across France and beyond. Princes, dukes, counts, allied kings from Bohemia, nobles from the Low Countries. This was not merely a French army. It was a coalition of Europe's feudal elite, a gathering of men bred for war since childhood. Their armor was worth more than the lifetime output of entire peasant villages. Their horses were trained weapons. For 5 centuries, men like these had decided battles with a single charge. To them, Crecy was not a risk. It was destiny. Edward III understood something his enemies did not. This battle would not be won by courage. It would be won before it even began. Outnumbered more than 3 to 1, exhausted from weeks of marching, Edward chose not to run. Instead, he chose the ground. Near the village of Crecy, he positioned his army on a gentle slope. To reach him, the French would be forced to attack uphill, through soft, churned earth. Then came the formation. Edward divided his army into 3 defensive divisions. Between them, 5,000 English and Welsh longbowmen were arranged in a wide V, a shape designed to overlap fields of fire and turn the hill into a funnel of death. But the most shocking order came next. Edward commanded his knights to dismount. These were men raised for the thunder of cavalry charges. Men whose horses were worth more than gold. now stepping down into the mud to fight beside peasants. According to Jean Froissart, the order caused disbelief within the English ranks. To fight on foot was to abandon centuries of chivalric tradition. Edward did not hesitate. Survival mattered more than pride. While the French argued about honor, the English prepared the battlefield. Sharpened wooden stakes were driven into the ground, angled toward the enemy. Ditches and shallow pits were dug under torchlight, invisible from a distance. Then the weather intervened. Dark clouds rolled in. Rain fell across the field. To the French, it was an inconvenience. To the English, it was an opportunity. The longbow required dry strings to maintain power. So the English calmly unstrung their bows and tucked the strings beneath cloaks and helmets. The Genoese crossbowmen hired by France did not. Modern experiments conducted by the royal armories confirm what medieval chroniclers observed. Wet bowstrings lose range and penetrating power dramatically. That night, the English ate, rested, and waited. The French arrived late, hungry, and impatient. The trap was no longer theoretical. It was complete. The Battle of Crécy did not begin with strategy. It began with pride. Philip VI ordered his army to wait. The men ignored him. French nobles surged forward shouting, lowering lances, desperate not to miss the glory. Once the first ranks moved, discipline collapsed. The army became a crowd. The Genoese crossbowmen advanced first. 5,000 professionals, hired at great cost. But their pavis shields were still with the baggage train. Their crossbow strings, soaked by the rain, sagged and weakened. They fired. Most bolts fell short. Then the English answered. 5,000 longbowmen released together. Contemporary witnesses wrote that the sound was like thunder, that the sky darkened. Each archer loosed up to 12 arrows per minute. More than 60,000 arrows fell every minute. The Genoese broke. They turned and ran back toward the French lines, and were cut down. According to chroniclers, a French noble shouted, "Kill this rabble blocking our way." Mounted knights charged straight into their own mercenaries, trampling and slashing them apart. Then came the cavalry. 12,000 armored knights advanced uphill, through mud, over bodies. At long range, arrows struck horses. Even armored horses had vulnerable eyes, mouths, and legs. A wounded horse does not charge. It screams, rears, and collapses, becoming a half-ton obstacle. Momentum vanished. At closer range, bodkin arrowheads punched through weak points in armor. Visors, joints, armpits, thighs. Modern ballistic testing shows that even when arrows failed to penetrate, the blunt impact was devastating, like repeated hammer blows against steel. Wave followed wave, 16 charges, according to Jean Froissart. Each assault was more chaotic than the last. The battlefield Edward had prepared now did its work. Horses fell into hidden ditches. Knights crashed into sharpened stakes. The mud, churned by thousands of hooves and boots, became a trap. Dismounted knights in 60 pounds of armor could barely stand. English archers fired until their quivers emptied, then ran forward, pulling arrows from the dead and dying, and firing them back. The French were killed by their own steel and their own arrows. Then the blind King of Bohemia rode forward. Blind for 10 years, he refused to flee. According to Froissart, he declared, "The King of Bohemia does not run from battle." His knights tied their reins to his horse and led him into the slaughter. They died together, swords raised, unable to see the arrows that ended them. It was the last pure gesture of chivalric honor, and it vanished into the mud of Crecy. When darkness fell, the English did not celebrate. They stayed where they stood. Any wounded Frenchman who moved was killed. By morning, the scale of the disaster was undeniable. More than 1,500 French nobles lay dead on the field. Princes, counts, dukes, men whose names had defined regions, erased in a single afternoon. Philip VI himself had been wounded. An arrow struck his jaw. His guards dragged him from the field as he tried to return. The sacred oriflamme, the banner said to guarantee victory, was abandoned in the mud. English losses were staggeringly small. Around 40 men, only 2 knights, 1 English knight for hundreds of French nobles. So extreme was the disparity that some contemporaries refused to believe it. They spoke of divine judgment, of miracles. The truth was colder. There were not enough surviving nobles to bury the dead with proper rites. Bodies lay rotting for days. Crows and wolves fed on princely flesh. Local peasants stripped armor worth fortunes, melting steel that had failed its owners. Entire regions lost their lords overnight. Feudal administration collapsed. Laws went unenforced. Power vacuums spread. Crecy was not just a battlefield. It was a social shock wave. For centuries, war had preserved the noble class. At Crecy, war devoured it. Crecy did not end the war, but it ended an era. France did not collapse overnight, but it was shaken to its foundations. So many nobles died that entire regions were left leaderless. Local power fractured. The illusion of noble invincibility was gone. Slowly, painfully, France began to change. More infantry, more missile troops, more fighting on foot. Armor became heavier, then pointless. Cavalry charges became rarer, then suicidal. Yet old habits die slowly. 10 years later, at Poitiers, French knights repeated the same mistakes, charging uphill into prepared English positions. They lost another king. Crecy had proven a brutal truth. Courage cannot defeat mathematics. Nobility cannot stop arrows. Honor does not negate physics. Modern military historians view Crecy as a revolution. Prepared defensive positions, disciplined, sustained firepower. Combined arms work as a system. Every principle of modern warfare appeared, not in a laboratory, but in a muddy field in 1346. And yet, there is irony. The longbow that killed chivalry was itself temporary, required a lifetime of training. When gunpowder weapons arrived, tools any peasant could see, aim, and fire, the longbow faded into history. Progress destroys its own weapons. The final image of Crecy remains haunting. French nobles trampling their own allies to reach glory, while English peasants stood calmly, shooting as they had practiced every Sunday after church. That muddy slope near Crecy was not just a battlefield. It was the grave of the medieval world. If one battle could erase an entire way of war, which other battle do you believe ended an era? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to explore more moments where history broke apart, subscribe and continue the journey with this channel.